Ange.
Hey, Les, what's cooking?
Hey, you were supposed to say what's cooking good looking.
I know, but you're getting a fat head, so I have to stop that. I'm gonna just sprinkle that when I think it's deserved or when, but it won't be all the time. It won't be all the
Okay.
time. Because in that TV that you set up, that your head is expanding. And so I noticed that. And so I'm gonna stop that.
There you go.
We have another guest, Les. We're doing this.
Yes, we're doing this. And welcome to another episode of Black Boomer Besties from Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. Why do I do that? Okay. All right.
Who's our guest?
Well, our guest today is Dr. Gertrude Jacinta Fraser, who happens to be my sister.
My sister too.
Okay. My sister first.
Okay, that's true.
Her middle name is Jacinta, so we fondly call her Jas or Jassy. But you have to be in the club to call her that. She's Gertrude. She's not Gertie, none of that. She's Gertrude or Jas, okay?
Okay.
So we invited her
Or
here
doctor to her students.
Doctor, that's right. That too. Mommy, remember Jas? Mommy would always have people call you Dr.
Fraser.
Dr. Fraser.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Why not? Hell yeah. You've earned that. Am I the only doctor, the only person who's not a doctor in the building?
I think so.
But you play one on a podcast.
And look, and I'm a doctor on TV right now.
I was reminding Leslie, Jas, how in our house that TV had a vice grip, a small vice grip on it. We were fancy.
Every house.
Every house had pliers. We had a vice grip. That was a little elevated, I think.
I guess so.
We had a vice grip, so we didn't ever lose it. It lived there. Anyway.
Can you give us Dr. Jas's bio?
Oh my gosh. Do I have a bio?
Where do you begin?
Where do I begin? Listen, we're going to do a bio and we're going to insert it in here because it's really, really
rich,
critical,
extensive
for you all to know who this person, who I'm blessed to call sister, is. She used to be someone who I hope I don't cry at any point during this podcast, but she used to be someone that I idolized when I was growing up. She was just an amazing example of kindness, and she loves me fiercely and always has. And brilliant. I was the slow one in the family. Brilliant, and I just felt like she knew everything. She probably felt like that too.
No, not all the time.
Not all the time. But now I've grown to really admire her and see her as just this brilliant light in the world, and for her students. She's a professor at. She has been a professor at several institutions, but now, am I allowed to say where you're Professor Jas?
Yeah, sure.
She is a medical anthropologist and a professor at the University of Virginia. And so we invited her to come for many reasons. We might meander, just expect that. But the primary reason is, as we've been focusing on living bolder in our older years, Jas has been investigating the possibility of retiring abroad. And we thought that it would be really informative and inspiring for you all to hear what her experiences have been. And so we invited her to share that with you today. Yeah. So.
And before I even look how long we've been talking before Jazz has been even able to get a word in edgewise. But that's the boomer way.
That's the boomer way. It's our boomer way.
It's our boomer way. But what I wanted to say about Jazz in the way that I've known her for almost 50 years is I looked at you, Jazz, as this like wise sage. Even when we were teenagers and you know, obviously you weren't a whole lot older than we are.
Not really.
But I just looked at you almost as this like untouchable, older, smart person that you were never in our league.
Right.
You know? And then you started taking up courses of study that were just so foreign to us. It wasn't science per se. It wasn't pure social science in a way. It was women's studies, then anthropology. And how many Black anthropologists do I know? One, you know, but I've never even considered that discipline before speaking to you, you know? So, wow. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Well, actually, no, I'm not. Thank you for inviting me. I really didn't want to do this.
Yeah. I'll even go into that backstory.
I hesitated, and then the phone rang, and I saw it was from Leslie, and I was like, somebody must have died. So I picked it up. I'm like, oh my God.
But it's so funny because you've been telling Ange no for quite a while now. And what I said is
she never said no. No, she never said no. She said, let me think about it. She said, let me think about it. But then it's like.
And then Angela said, well, yes, but you're going to say yes. And I resented that. So I didn't get back to her.
Well, the thing is, though,
called, and
this is
no.
And you couldn't say no to me. Thank you, sis, for that. But, and this is an honest question. What I said to Ange was that, but Jazz speaks all around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, what you said is, what? Do we have to go to Germany for her to want to talk to us? Do we have to go abroad for her to
yes, because she presents internationally.
Yeah.
And as a college professor, she speaks in front of students and talks to them regularly. And I was just saying, I just didn't understand the apprehension that you had, you know, coming on our little podcast like this. After all, it's just us.
Well, it's not the apprehension. I think I am, in some ways, you've talked a bit about me, but you and Angela sort of have your thing. And it's a dynamic that's your own, you know. And so there's a way in which I hesitated because it's your dynamic, it's not mine. And I was like,
I understand.
Do I want to step into it or not?
Into the vortex?
It was
I understand.
Let's say that you've already described how you perceive me, which is not necessarily how I perceive myself. And as the sort of older, steadier, smarter, or if not smarter, sort of different in some ways.
Yes.
And so it's not exactly who I am, but it's kind of through your lens. And I didn't know if I wanted to be here through your lens, if you know what I mean. So
absolutely,
that was part
I get it.
Yeah. But I think you picked a great topic, and I've been thinking about it a lot. So I'm happy to share what I am thinking about, because there are probably a lot of folks my age and younger even. I think more and more African-American women at younger and younger ages are considering stepping away into some other world and trying to do it as early as possible and trying to come up with strategies to do it as early as possible. So in a way, I feel like I'm late to the game, and I can talk a little bit about, I will talk about that, but I feel like I feel almost like it's too late sometimes to make a change like what I'm contemplating. So it'll be fun to think think it out loud with you too.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to know, like, where did this stirring about perhaps being an expatriate, where did that come from? What were the origins?
So the expat, and I'll put that in quotation marks because I think that's something we can talk about, because expatriate often typically represented mostly whites from the West going to live in other parts of the world and almost living an elevated life by virtue of being expats. And opposite of that would be natives.
Right.
And of having a lot of the privileges of being white in some other place. So it does have a kind of colonizing vibe to it.
Jess, that reminds me of the Indian Summers. I don't know if that BBC program where they go to India and treat Indians like shit.
To Sri Lanka,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there is some conversation about, well, what do people, African Americans from the US or from the UK or Canada, call themselves when they go to other parts of the world, particularly when they go to Africa, Some people call them diasporans, and people are trying to figure out different ways of returnees. So I think it's a kind of unstable category right now, even though there's a long history of African Americans going to Africa and to Europe, as you know, James Baldwin for one, but Richard Wright, Dora Neale Hurston. I can't remember if she traveled. She traveled to the Caribbean, but
with
Josephine Baker.
That's
because in some way there was a space, more spaces for freedom sometimes in Europe or in other parts of the world for African Americans, not always. So there is this long history of even African American women travelers, but there is this stereotype that African Americans don't travel, and it's kind of important to kind of excavate the long history of African American travel, particularly of single women traveling, African American women traveling. So the reason that I've been thinking about it is because I grew up in Jamaica, and even in Jamaica, we didn't necessarily have a settled life. We moved from parish to parish. Like my father got a job in one parish and we moved there. And then when I was ready to go to school, my mom was working in the countryside and she sent me up to my grandmother to live while Angela and my brother Mark stayed with her. And then we moved to my aunt's house. So my childhood is really, when I think about it, has been a lot of, let's call it residential instability, and kind of moving around a lot. And so there was a part of that I did enjoy, kind of learning about different places and seeing different things. But part of it was kind of scary because it wasn't anything that I was controlling. It was adults making decisions for reasons having to do with what they needed. And so I would say that the moment we started to move, me being the oldest, and then Mark, my brother, and Angela, the moment we started to move, I had to take on the role of a kind of protector, kind of shielding my siblings from the more disruptive part of moving. And so moving had a kind of complicated thing for me because it was the excitement of being in a new place. And I can remember when we moved to Highgate, I could walk into the town and go to the movies. And so it was exciting, but it was also scary because adults were not necessarily reliable in terms of helping us. We just did what we were told, So, but it did spark my interest in moving, but also the different kinds of people that you meet when you move. So once when we moved, that's the first time I saw Black Americans. They came to do Peace Corps in the part of Jamaica that we were. And so it was just fascinating to me. I think it's the first time I saw white people. So it was exciting, and if we had stayed in the western part where we were, I would never have had that opportunity. So that's kind of, I think, what started. Then, of course, the huge move was moving from Jamaica to the U.S. and all the excitement. I remember the night before we left, I was looking out my grandparents' house and seeing all the banana trees and thinking, oh, tomorrow I won't be seeing these, but not knowing what I was going to, but just having the sense that the landscape was going to be just altered in some way that I couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
So
how old were you when you came here, Jess?
I was 12 and Angela was 8.
Yeah, I was 8.
Yeah. And my brother was 10.
I don't even, and our eldest brother had already come here for university.
He had come. He had come before even my mom did. Yeah.
So all of this early moving, did it give you somewhat of a fearlessness about the unknown and new places or foreign places?
I think it made me curious about the differences, but it also, because we had heard stories when on my father's side, we had heard stories about my grandfather's sister who went to Panama and never came back, and my grandfather going to Kingston for the first time to get her luggage, get her things, so she might have died in Panama. So there were always these stories of people leaving and disappearing often. Or in my mom's case, she grew up in Cuba until she was about 8 or 9. And so the stories of leave taking from Cuba to Jamaica was such a part of our just family history. So there was this tradition of all kinds of people, and that's true, I think, in the Caribbean. So
of movement.
So it was a part, not that I would have said at 12 years old, oh, this is part of our history and of the way our family responds to opportunity and stress and kind of making sense of the world that didn't necessarily give you everything that you needed. So it was, I felt like it was a part of the family history. My uncles had left maybe a couple of years before us. So I don't think people from the Caribbean have ever just stayed in one place. And I don't think, I'm any different.
Yeah.
Just a lot of movement back and forth, the deep history of it, sometimes forced, like with the slave trade. So one of the things why I'm thinking about where would I retire is there are many reasons, but one of them is that the first one is to me anyway, and everybody's going to have a different take on this, but I really don't feel like I have a place to return to in Jamaica. Do you know what I mean? I've lived most of my life here. I don't feel necessarily that this is home either. So it's almost like I have to have a different kind of home. It's not, can't return to the one that I left. The one that I'm in for 30 plus years doesn't feel like it speaks to me in a deep kind of way. And so that's the question. Well, what would speak to me? Or
and how would you construct a place that's home?
Yeah.
In a place that you've never been.
And is that a possibility? That's the scary part about it. Is it a possibility? So so to answer your question, I think I've always craved travel and novelty. And but on the other hand, I've also deeply needed stability, And so I spent most of my career in one university, which I would never have imagined that would happen. I've been thinking about that, and I realized, and I've had opportunities to leave, and I haven't left. And I've often wondered, well, why would I stay in this small college town in Virginia? And I think in part is because there's some part of me that kind of needed that stability. But some of the regret is that I didn't explore more. I traveled a lot, but I always came back. So this is a moment where I can make new decisions, and that's what I'm thinking about.
Wow. And you've taken your research your researcher skills into this area of what you want to check out in terms of where you're going to retire. I know you've been thinking about it for a while, and Les, I don't know if you know this. Jazz is a real like a YouTube, like she gets into people's lives on YouTube, and so there I always get the sense that she sees how other people are living full lives in Japan, or I don't even know all the places. It's just when we get together, you're squirreled away in your room watching your YouTube couples or
like Black
people.
in Japan,
Right?
Black in Korea.
I didn't even know things like that exist.
Diasporans in Gambia.
Yeah.
YLF Ghana.
YLF Ghana, that pops up sometimes. And I always click on those. I know it's just clickbait, but I always click on those YLF Ghana. I'm like, wait, I want to go to Ghana.
How we built a B&B in Rwanda. I mean, people African Americans are on the move,
On the move, yeah.
On the move.
Yeah.
And particularly women. There's one woman I follow who's plans and lives for, 3 months at a time, sometimes less, house sitting. And she had the YouTube channel, Stephanie Perry, where she tells people about how they can house sit, so that she says, don't wait till you have all your ducks in a row until you've saved all the money. Find practical ways that you can try something out. And house sitting,
wow.
way, and that's how she started her YouTube channel, which has grown toward doing other things. She had like a house sitting school.
Wow.
How to get good, and she had house sat and pet sat all over the world. So, I mean, and these people are younger than me and just deciding to step into the void. And I learn a lot from them. And there are others that focus on finances and others that focus on, how do you get your permanent residency here in Mexico? So I learn a lot from people on YouTube because they're independent content creators. And they're living their lives at the same time. And many of them are very authentic. They don't code over things, and get to see what it might actually feel like without necessarily doing it yourself initially.
And they video from those places, right? So
they video from those places. And some of them now, they have yearly networking conferences where you can go and meet people. I think the power of collaboration, a kind of cooperative effort, is one of the things that fuels the movement. Because, particularly as a single African American woman, you need to have a sense of a community and of people you can trust. And these women have created that virtually and also in real life. So it's amazing to follow them and to.
Wow, I didn't even know this world exists.
Oh my gosh!
While you're speaking about your YouTube interest, what reminded me about you, Jazz, is that you were the very first person I knew that was interested in reality television.
Yes.
Big Brother, Real World, those early shows, and I had never heard of them. And Ange told me, this is so many years ago, that you were interested in it because your anthropological mind wanted to see how different groups interacted. And other people are looking at it for like, who's sexually attractive or that type of thing. But you were looking at it or drama.
Well, Jessie was looking at it for drama too.
But in a different way, because it didn't seem to me at all an intellectual endeavor until I heard about your interest.
It was really a deep immersion in other people's lives, and that's what brought me to anthropology. And that's what draws me to travel, so very same thing on YouTube, because it's such a kind of diverse field in terms of what you can find. And once I, for example, found out about Stephanie Perry, then I found out about other people that she referenced. And all of a sudden you see, some of these are people in their 20s who are kind of digital nomads, and then there are people in their 60s. And one woman has her teenage daughter, and one couple that they've traveled all over Africa. Their daughter, who is, I think, 16, has traveled with them now for almost 5 years.
Wow.
And so it's really amazing.
So I know that Portugal is something that you did a lot of investigation about and thought about. So talk about how that came up. And
well, let's see, how did Portugal come up? Well,
that's kind of big.
I initially visited it because I was going to a conference, and it turns out that at the time, this was 2018, I think, it was one of the cheapest places to do Airbnb in Europe.
Wow.
That's changed because everybody has discovered it, but it used to be this quiet secret. And Lisbon is this amazing city that's basically built on these hills overlooking the ocean. And it's like a hop, skip, and jump to West Africa. And also it has this long history of Moors. I mean, they moved all the way into Europe via Portugal, and the architecture, reflects this African influence. So it's just a fascinating place for me. And also, there were some of the first Europeans to connect the Atlantic world, because they began to, they were sailors, explorers. So they went to Africa. I think they found the Cape Verde Islands. They started beginning to get involved with sugarcane agriculture. And in some way, they're the first to begin to enslave Africans. Yeah. So it's this fascinating place of these men, primarily men, who built these ships and just started sailing, stepping into the unknown. I mean, they were nefarious in many ways, but just sort of, kind of fascinating history of that small place. And I think in part because there was always this infusion of new people coming into Portugal. So I was really interested in it. And when I went, one of the places that I went was in front of a Catholic church. And it was the place where hundreds of Jews were burned because they either refused or were perceived as refusing to convert to Christianity. And they were just burned right there.
Wow.
So it was also very, oh my gosh, not only anti-Semitic, just a particular form of Catholicism that was brutal during the Inquisition. And a lot of those Jews, when they could escape, Portuguese Jews, they often were unable to find a place of refuge in Europe, and they got on these ships and went to the Caribbean. And that's what I found out, that on one side of the family, some of the family members were descended from Portuguese Jews who had come to the Caribbean and settled. And, some of them either married or had children with the African, either free or enslaved people in Jamaica. And so a lot of the names that sound Spanish are actually Portuguese names. And there was a Portuguese synagogue. There are 2 synagogues in Jamaica that were part of the diaspora of Portuguese Jews. So, so I found out about the family history, and that's why I got even more interested in Portugal. And at the time, I think they began, I don't know if it's changed, but they were offering citizenship in Portugal if you could prove that you were descended from Portuguese Jews who had been persecuted during this period, during the Inquisition, that it was almost like a right of return. So
is that something that you would be interested in doing?
Well, I thought about it a lot. In fact, another thing there's this YouTuber who has a YouTube where it says, everywhere in the world you can find a Jamaican, and he interviews Jamaicans in Saudi Arabia, in Curacao, in all over the world. And he interviewed this woman who was living in Portugal, and she was a descendant from Portuguese Jews and had gotten citizenship. And he was talking to her, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. and then, so I that's what got me hooked on Ancestry.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when my niece, who done a lot of the research, helped me to begin to identify our connection to with Henriquez, which was my maternal grandmother's side of the family. And Angela remembers that because we always were told that part of our family were Jewish. Mm-hmm. You remember that, right, Ange?
Yeah, I remember. I'm in such a whenever I listen to you, it's such a mixture of family, but then there's this scholarly Black woman that
I'm thinking that as well.
It's like I get flooded with I get very emotional whenever I hear you just I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot but I just think of you as being someone who is constantly learning and constantly kind of opening up. I think I was telling you, Les, maybe it was someone else, that Jesse's figuring all this stuff out about our connection, because we knew Mama's family were Enriquez, right? We knew that. But what you have uncovered, and I know the work that Colleen had done,
Natalie have done too,
and Natalie,
her nieces,
I'm just gonna hook on her coattails because Jessie has done all the heavy lifting. I mean, it's just amazing. Here I am being afraid of getting on Ancestry because I don't want them to have my DNA.
No, I mean, listen. First of all, that's a legitimate fear, and that to me, that's a complexity of all of this. Because so I actually reached out and had a couple of conversations with this woman who is now has Portuguese citizenship, who is from Jamaica.
The one that you heard about from the interview, you reached out to her?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm talking about, Les.
And she had bought this farm in, I can't remember what part of Portugal, which at the time, I mean, getting abandoned farms were so inexpensive. And then you'd have to, there are structures there, some of them in ruin, some of them in not bad shape. And you'd have to have the money to invest in it and so on.
Right.
But the kind of fascinating thing for me is, and it comes back always to, there's this... African-American historian, actually a family of Curacao. Her name is Sadia Hartman, and she says, she writes about going back to Africa to kind of rediscover the slave trade from the perspective of the Africans and the people who left and the people who remained, trying to understand it from a kind of contemporary and archival perspective.
Right.
And it's really, it's a hard thing because so I started doing the research, and my niece, Natalie, had done some, and I reached out to this woman, and she said, well, send me what you have, and then we can go from there. And so we had a long list of the names of my great-great-grandfather, Henriquez, and his children, and the connections, and so on. And there's also a Facebook page that talks about Jamaican Jewish Sephardic ancestry. But the weird thing is that just made me, it's always so difficult, is that they basically kind of began to say, well, how do you know that this great-great-grandfather, whose father was Henriquez, how do you know he was not a slave or an ex-slave who took the name of the Henriques. It's like they can never get away from these narratives of subordination, and of something, the idea of kind of real marriage or where you outside. And it's so embedded in all of the ancestry stuff, but it's also embedded in this thing about returning to Portugal, because I think to the extent that you have like information that your family was indeed Jewish because you're registered in these synagogues, if you look in the record, sometimes it will say something like colored or a free man, but then they might say, I think they might even say bastard or
mulatto. I've seen on mine. Mulatto.
Yeah. So these contemporary people who can prove that their parents were married have more of a purchase. And I think it's just infuriating, because they're using the same categories to say who has more access to the right of return and who doesn't. And so it just I reached a point where I was basically told that they couldn't find the names of my ancestors in any of a lot of the synagogue records were burned. So some of them are just not available, but they couldn't find a record. So maybe unlikely that, or it would be really expensive to prove that we're actually related to these people, even though we have this long, deep family history. So it's complicated, I think, for Black people in that land, in the West,
Sure. Now, I know that you were recently speaking to someone in Senegal, a family did you ever have that conversation?
Well, I mean, that's what so then I was like, okay, maybe Portugal is still a place I'm planning to go to, and I'm planning to pursue, trying to understand more about our Jewish heritage. In some ways, it's probably more reachable in spite of the difficulties of the archives than to understand and find out who our Nigerian ancestors were or Ghanaian ones, even though we know we have deep ancestors in Nigeria and Ghana. So it's still worth pursuing for me. I think it's important. But I began to think, well, do I want to live in Portugal as a Black woman from the US? There are a lot of Portuguese Africans who've lived in Portugal for centuries, and also ones who have recently migrated because the Portuguese were all over Africa, so Mozambique and so on. But even then, I think they struggle for recognition, So anyway, I just wondered, that a place, I love everything about the architecture and the richness of the cultural history, but I'm thinking, would I be really comfortable there? And there are some African Americans who have oh my goodness, there's one couple that they're retired in their 40s. They invested their money wisely and they retired to Portugal, bought a huge farm, and that sounds just amazing to me. But anyway, so then I started thinking, well, where would I go in Africa? And there's this couple, her name is Afro-Millennial Mama. She met her husband, she went on a student exchange, and he's Senegalese, and they got married. They moved to the US together at some point, and then they returned, and their little girl is 7, so they're young. And they built this amazing house outside of Dakar. Yeah. And she does consultations, and that's why I reach out to her. I haven't talked to her yet about doing a consult on whether or not Senegal would be a good place.
Have you been?
I've never been. I've been to Kenya, I've been to South Africa, but I've never been to Senegal. But it's one of it's French. And so I do speak some French. But it also has, I was just looking at the GDP and the level of participation of women in the political and social life. And it seems like those are kind of there are things that I find very positive about it as a result of that. It has good infrastructure, good roads. There's ocean. It's right on the ocean. So it just seems like a place, a lot of artists. Angela, you interviewed somebody from there.
Yeah.
There's an
sounds like a road trip.
So my plan is, that's why I reach out to these folks, because I'm going to try to go there this summer just to test it out.
The water, I know you love the water.
Right.
The French.
The
French. And I know that it's important for, of course, safety.
Safety, exactly.
That's a big thing. Outside of, being a woman necessarily, it's just to feel safe that when you need the police, that
they'll show up. Exactly.
That they'll show up. So that's where I'm rooting for. I'm rooting for Senegal.
Yeah, or another place.
Maybe it'll give me a nice place to visit.
Yeah, it'll be an amazing. Whenever I think about it, I do think about having a place that folks will come to and visit.
Yeah, like a compound.
That's what Mom had envisioned when she moved back to Jamaica. And
that's true.
And I find like I'm just sort of walking in those similar kind of ideas of creating a place that family and friends will want to come to.
Right.
And Senegal might be it. Yeah.
Wow.
I can sit and talk to you forever, Jazz. We're coming up at the end of the show, though.
Oh, no. We have to...
I always seem to be the one to put the, the lid on the party.
Because you're the timekeeper. I'm not good with that. I am not good with that. We have to play to our strengths.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to hear more adventures. But Jazz, you have so many more adventures to talk about.
Yeah.
And you see that we were not too silly for you.
It worked out.
It worked out. She said it worked out.
So I'd love to have you back talking about some of your other scholarly activities, because obviously me being in medicine and your work in the medical field on the other side of it is just amazing. And one of the things that I love about you that your sister has picked up, I wouldn't say use the word a contrarian. What I would say is that through you, Ange has helped me to see things in another way.
Yeah.
And not just to accept the obvious.
Yeah.
As I call it, dig a layer or two down.
Yes.
Ange will say, well, I wouldn't look at it that way. And you even said this to me a few days ago. Well, one thing that Jazz told me about, or it could be the phrase Black girl magic, or it could be this or that, or intersectionality or whatever. And I'm telling you, man, I'm getting like so much of an education.
I'm telling you, it's like this idea. I know. Yeah. It's like you have to
so
this idea of Black girl excellence. We don't have to be excellent. We can step away.
Yeah. It's tiring. It's
which is
tiring
a whole other,
excellent.
Maybe that's going to be, that could be our next podcast.
I would love that. And I mean, all of the things that we want to peel away at.
Ooh, that would be like the onion episode.
Jazz, we can
be the onion episode.
We can be cantankerous together.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies. This was another great, inspiring, awesome episode of Black Boomer Besties from Brooklyn. Thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Ange. Love you guys.
Thanks, Jazz. Thank you for the yes. Love you.
Love you. Bye.
Bye-bye.